I'm Jamie Lowe. I'm an associate professor in obstetrics and gynecology at OHSU.
In addition to her faculty position at Oregon Health and Science University, Jamie Lowe also sees patients. She says over the years, her patients have asked her a lot of questions about cannabis use during pregnancy.
They would say, I can't find anything out there similar to nicotine and alcohol, and so I feel like it's safe to keep using, or it actually treats my morning sickness really well. And so I decided to use that instead of some of the anti-nausea medication that was prescribed.
Unlike nicotine and alcohol, there isn't as much data available about how maternal cannabis use can affect a fetus. In human studies, it's hard to isolate cannabis.
This is the question I get asked all the time by my patients, like every day. Today I was in clinic this morning. 2 patients asked me this. And they were like, well, I've been looking at the stuff. How do we know this isn't because other people were using other drugs? How do we know it's not the nicotine? What if I just quit that? Why do I have to quit the cannabis?
Jamie says she cautions her patients against using cannabis during pregnancy. But this lack of definitive data makes it really hard for her to back that up with a clear answer as to why.
No data means it could be safe.
Jamie is working to get the answers her patients want by studying both humans and monkeys.
The whole point of mirroring the cannabis study in the monkey model with the human studies is really to just answer specifically the gaps in knowledge I can't do in human studies.
From the Gert Boyle studio, I'm Jen Chavez, and this is The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB about the place you call home. In the U.S., there are about 100,000 monkeys, baboons, and other primates living in captivity to support scientific research. About 5,000 of them are at OHSU's Oregon National Primate Research Center. That's where Jamie Lowe and others do experiments on monkeys to try to get clear data about things like cannabis use during pregnancy and to find cures for diseases like HIV. Animal rights activists have argued for decades that the center should be closed, and they're gaining momentum with support from some Oregon lawmakers. Scientists who oppose using animals in research argue that the practice has become obsolete and is hindering, not helping, the effort to find cures. OPB health reporter Amelia Templeton recently visited the Oregon National Primate Research Center and talked to a lot of smart people on all sides of this complex topic. I'm going to hand this episode off to her to tell you what she found. And just a quick note that this episode does include descriptions of what animals experience in a research lab. Please keep that in mind when choosing when and where to listen.
In the U.S., new drugs are typically tested in a small animal, like a mouse, and a large animal, like a dog or a monkey, before there's a human clinical trial. Animal testing has been the standard since 1938, after a pharmaceutical company accidentally poisoned and killed more than 100 people with a novel formulation of a common antibiotic. The Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, or PCRM, advocates for an end to all animal testing. Earlier this year, the group rolled out a media campaign that sounded like this.
They have torn infant monkeys from their mothers for fear experiments. They have injected pregnant monkeys with nicotine. Really? We know nicotine is unhealthy. OHSU should focus on patient care, not wasteful monkey experiments. 90% of animal experiments don't help patients, and modern research methods produce results without harming animals. Tell OHSU to close its outdated monkey facility. Oregon patients deserve better.
OHSU has accused the group of spreading misinformation. PCRM is not alone in calling for the center to be closed. In the 2025 legislative session, Oregon State Representative David Gomberg introduced legislation to phase out primate research at OHSU. The bill didn't pass, but Oregon Governor Tina Kotek said she agrees the center should wind down.
I believe the Primate Research Center is a center that needs to be closed. There needs to be a downsizing plan, similar to what Harvard did more than a decade ago, to run the course of the research there and close down the center. I think it's a financial liability. I think it's a moral liability for the institution. And I think there are different ways we can approach research without doing experiments on primates.
Earlier this year, federal funding for the Primate Center was in question. The National Institutes of Health has provided financial support for the center for more than 60 years. And in June, NIH announced it would continue funding through 2026 to the tune of $13.7 million. I recently visited the research center to find out more about how it all works. It's a quiet campus in Beaverton, surrounded by a thick stand of Douglas fir trees. Kayla McDaniel was my tour guide.
Hi, I'm Kayla. I give tours. I do education outreach, so we invite the public in. They come see the animals, they talk to scientists and vets, and they learn a little bit about what we do, how we care for animals, and the science research that we're able to achieve using the monkey model.
We walked along an outdoor path in between several very large enclosures holding rhesus macaques. Inside were a dozen monkeys with golden fur and pink faces. They're each the size of a small house cat. A lot of the groups that are against using animals in research focus on the harm that animals experience, both as a part of the research and as a result of accidents. For example, in 2020, an employee at the Oregon National Primate Research Center inadvertently put 2 monkeys inside a cage washing machine. One was scalded and died, and the other had to be euthanized. As we walked, Kayla explained the regulations that the Primate Center adheres to.
So we have oversight from the Animal Welfare Act. We have oversight from the USDA. They do at least 2, but can do more, unannounced site visits per year. And then we have an additional voluntary accreditation that holds us to a higher standard than the federal level. We take that animal care very seriously, and we hold ourselves to the highest standards possible.
Any member of the public can request a tour of the Primate Research Center. But what you see is a limited view of what takes place here. The tours do not include the inside of research buildings or seeing any monkeys that are actively part of an experiment. What you see is the outdoor breeding colonies, where monkeys live in large family groups. They're in open corrals or in spacious outdoor enclosures with steel bars that let in the light and fresh air. Oregon State Rep David Gomberg, who wants to see the center closed, refers to this as the zoo tour and argues that it obscures a lot of the more uncomfortable aspects of what goes on at the research facility. There are about 3,000 monkeys in the breeding colony. Some of them will eventually be involved in research. That means they'll be moved into much smaller stainless steel cages with just 1 or 2 others for company.
When animals are indoors, there is a lot of work that our animal behaviorists do to ensure that the social emotional needs of these animals are met. So the number one thing we can do to improve primate well-being is to socially house them in pair animals, and that is standard best practice.
OHSU agreed to show me some examples of the cages that they use to house monkeys during experiments. The cages are stainless steel with blue perches. Some have tiny hammocks made out of a rubbery material. They're just about the size of a large dog crate, 36 inches by 32 inches. It's a size that, just looking at it, doesn't seem humane. While I was there, I learned that the size is set by law. It's the minimum required by the U.S. Animal Welfare Act. The Primate Center does have some larger cages that they use when they work with scientists from Europe, where the animal welfare laws require more space. They do have the ability to connect some of the smaller cages to allow the animals to be together in small groups. Kayla showed me the outside of the building where surgeries take place. I was not allowed into those spaces at all. She described what goes on, and I was surprised to learn that the animals have access to some of the same comfort measures that humans get in a hospital setting.
We know that animals can get colder under anesthesia due to smaller body mass, so we take greater care during surgery to ensure that their body temperature is adequate. We do things like warming IV fluids before surgery. We have a warm operating table. We have a blanket. We have booties during surgery. And then we have warm post-op cages as well if they need that for recovery.
As part of the tour, I got to meet Jeff Stanton, the attending veterinarian for the animals at the Primate Center. His role is a legally required position, and he has a team that works with him to provide veterinary care for the animals.
I enjoy the position because I believe that animal research needs to happen to make certain scientific advances. All right, in certain situations, I believe that animals are justified to answer these questions. But I want to be, as a veterinarian, involved in that. I'm really at the cutting edge of balancing scientific needs and animal welfare.
I asked him how scientists and veterinarians like him determine how much pain and suffering is acceptable in animal research and how much is just too much.
It's not black and white, right? There's gray area there. And that's why we have an institutional animal care and use committee that is a group. Our committee has 14 people on it that all review the protocol and weigh in on whether or not they think that this protocol is appropriate for the animal and that any sort of pain and distress the animal might have can be controlled. And so it's up to that committee at the end of the day to decide, yes, this is something that can go forward or it can't go forward.
To the facility's critics, like PCRM, that is not a satisfying answer. They say OHSU's Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee is failing at its most basic job, screening out experiments that aren't important enough to justify monkeys being harmed or killed. They say the committee is greenlighting proposals for research that isn't original and could be done without animals. The committee, they say, is failing to meet the standards set out in the Animal Welfare Act. In particular, they've pointed to OHSU's many studies on the effects of cannabis and alcohol use, including some of Jamie Lowe's research.
Coming up after a break, we dig more into the science and learn about some of the alternatives to using animals in medical research. Thanks for listening to The Evergreen, our podcast from OPB about the place you call home. If you like what you hear, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, and we'll brighten your Monday morning a little bit with something new and interesting to listen to each week. You can also follow OPB on Instagram at OPB Photo, or follow me directly at Jen Chavez OPB. That's Jen with 2 N's, and I will keep you posted on everything Team Evergreen is up to. And remember, this episode about the Oregon National Primate Research Center and all the great OPB reporting and storytelling you hear on this show is made possible by the support of many thousands of OPB members. That support is especially important to us now, ever since Congress wiped out federal funding for public media. That was $5 million a year for us here at OPB. Well, we are so grateful to everyone who's stepped in to help us close that gap and keep public media going strong. If you haven't yet, join them today and support our journalism by becoming an OPB sustaining member at opb.org/pod. And now, back to Amelia Templeton and her in-depth look at primate research in Oregon.
I was really curious about that statistic in the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine's media campaign that says 90% of animal experiments don't help patients. So I talked to Jared Bailey, the director of medical research at PCRM. He has a PhD in genetics, and his focus is the track record of the research itself. He says monkey models are not a good predictor for medical treatment of humans because of the genetic differences between the species. Macaques and humans share about 93% of their DNA.
Even when we share genes, we share many genes with other primate species. The genes we share are expressed differently, so they do different jobs in different ways. We know this is a fact. The literature is full of this evidence. I've been part of gathering it myself and publishing it.
Jared points out that what's toxic in one species often isn't in another. Dogs are a familiar example. They can't eat chocolate, it makes them vomit. Or grapes, which can lead to kidney failure. When the revolutionary cancer drug Gleevec was under investigation, it was tested in dogs. It gave them liver failure, an effect that didn't turn up in human clinical trials. That drug went on to become one of the biggest breakthroughs in cancer treatment. Jared says species differences are the biggest scientific problem with animal research. But there are others, like the unnatural environment research animals live in. He says that one of his most widely read papers speaks to the effect of stress on the animals and how that can affect the outcome of scientific research.
They're being handled, however gently and with care they might be handled, they're being handled, they're having blood taken, they're having test products and medicines forced down a tube down their throat. They're having painful procedures done to them. They're being restrained and so on and so forth. And this is the point. That stress isn't just a welfare issue for animals. It doesn't just cause them suffering. Because of how stress works, we know that stress is bad for us. Of course, we're told to avoid stress and be mindful and relax and de-stress. And that's because it has really profound biological adverse effects on us. So from a physiological perspective, that stress, we know, affects the immune system, all major organs. It affects the liver and how it metabolizes drugs that might be under test, and so on and so forth. So that makes the differences that already exist, because there are different species, even more stark.
Remember Jamie Lowe, the OBGYN we heard from at the very beginning of this episode? Her research about the use of cannabis during pregnancy uses both humans and animals. And she says it's important to be able to isolate cannabis in the monkey models because so many of the human subjects use multiple substances. She explained that early data across both humans and monkeys suggests that a baby's lung function could be affected by cannabis exposure in utero. This information makes it easier to explain the possible risks of cannabis use to her pregnant patients.
They will say, well, I don't want to do that to my baby. Okay, sure. For a morning sickness, I'll use the medication that doesn't work as well as my cannabis. But to me, now knowing that those are the risks on the table, I would rather have undertreated nausea and just deal with it than do that. And hearing that from my patients is just such a powerful, motivator for me to try to get them answers. And that's really kind of what drives it.
Jamie is one of many researchers who are using primates in their work.
I'm Jonas Sasha. I'm professor and chief of the Division of Pathobiology and Immunology at the Oregon National Primate Research Center.
Jonah's main focus is finding a cure for HIV. His work was inspired by a man named Timothy Ray Brown, the first person to be cured of HIV. Patients with HIV typically have to stay on medication for life, or reservoirs of the virus can spring back into action. Being cured is exceptionally rare. Brown is one of just a handful of confirmed cases. It happened after the patients got cancer and were given stem cell transplants, a kind of last-ditch treatment when chemo alone won't work.
Because they're clinical cases, you don't really know how they were cured, and there are multiple hypotheses. And I realized at the time that this is a fantastic question to ask with non-human primates, where you can control all the experimental variables and you can repeat the procedure of a stem cell transplantation and really drill down and understand the mechanisms of this.
He explained that stem cell transplantation is too intense and too dangerous to be rolled out to everyone currently infected with HIV. He believes that the knowledge he's gained from monkey experiments will help him engineer a cure that could be safely applied to millions of people. Working with a cancer doctor at OHSU, Jonah built a stem cell transplant clinic for macaques. They infected some of the monkeys with simian immunodeficiency virus, or SIV, the parent virus of HIV. Then they gave them stem cell transplants. It's a risky procedure in monkeys just as it is in humans. After the transplants, about half the macaques had to be euthanized due to fatal complications like infections. But in 2 of the monkeys that survived, Jonah had achieved what he was hoping for, a cure. More than 2 years after the transplants, they had no detectable SIV virus.
So yes, we have cured 2 animals of SIV. It's something that I'm very proud of. And because we did this in the setting where we're able to control variables, we know the mechanisms of their cure.
The next step, Jonah says, is a human clinical trial, where he's planning on taking what he learned from his monkey experiments and using it to try to cure a human patient. He's starting that work now, and he's got buy-in from important places. The NIH just awarded him a major grant that will provide up to 10 years of funding for his effort to develop a cure that could advance to human trials. And Jonah has recruited 3 special partners. Their names are Adam Castillejo, Paul Edmonds, and Mark Franke. 3 men who were cured of HIV after stem cell transplants, who hope Jonah can use their cells to help others. Jonah says he cares about the monkeys that were in his experiment. He was able to publish a paper explaining how stem cell transplants worked to clear the hidden reservoirs of the SIV virus. In that paper, Jonah thanks the macaques for their sacrifice.
The end goal of this is to lessen human suffering. There's no other way that we can generate new medicines, therapeutics, vaccines unless we'd use this pathway. There just is not right now.
This idea that research in animals drives breakthroughs in medicine and keeps harmful approaches out of the clinic is a mainstream belief shared by many scientists. But not all. Jared Bailey from PCRM says today, 9 out of 10 drugs that are safe and promising after those animal tests are toxic or ineffective in human clinical trials. He pointed to the effort to develop a vaccine against HIV as a good example of this problem.
We don't have an HIV/AIDS vaccine that works in humans. We've had dozens that have appeared to be safe and effective in animal models, including monkeys and including chimpanzees. None of them have worked in people. That is as clear a sign as any that we need to do something else.
So, what's the alternative? To answer that question, I want to introduce you to one more scientist. Thomas Hartung is a professor at Johns Hopkins University and a pioneer of alternatives to animal testing. He says he's always loved animals, but one of the biggest drivers behind his work is the idea that animal research is impractical.
You are so limited in the number of experiments you can run.
One reason for this is the amount of resources it takes to house and care for the animals. Hartung is focused on using modern technologies to replace animal models. This work took a big leap forward when a Japanese researcher named Shinya Yamanaka discovered a way to reprogram any human cell and turn it back into a stem cell. That discovery earned him the Nobel Prize in 2012. And it's paved the way for scientists like Thomas to do more and more complex things in the lab with human cells. He's been able to grow brain organoids, basically tiny, very simplified brains. His organoids can play simple video games, like Pong.
They are increasingly showing capabilities even to learn and memorize. So they're extremely capable. And this is already the maximum you can get out of a macaque, for example. Yeah?
He's able to mass produce these organoids, and he says that they lend themselves to studying the effects of substances on the brain.
You can run as many experiments in parallel and change doses and assess it.
Thomas Hartung and others believe that eventually these lab-grown organs will be a cheaper and more reliable way to test drug safety and do some basic research. And the move away from animal models has already started. Hartung points to the COVID-19 vaccines as an example. That thing I told you at the beginning, that new drugs are tested in a small animal and a large one before they're given to any human volunteers, that didn't happen with the COVID-19 vaccines. With the pandemic already underway, researchers believed that normal processes would have been too slow. So they ran the human and animal trials in parallel at the same time. For better or worse, depending on your perspective, the Trump administration is accelerating the move away from animal research. This year, the head of the National Institutes of Health threw his support behind alternative methods like Hartung's. He announced a new office within the NIH that will validate and scale up non-animal approaches to biomedical research. And he said including new methods will be a condition of future NIH grant funding for new research. But even Thomas Hartung says we're still a ways away from completely replacing animal models.
The difficulties are where you have long-term treatments of animals, where you are looking essentially in each and every organ. And it is very, very difficult to find a battery of tests which is reflecting all of the possible organ effects.
In the end, most of the scientists I spoke with came down somewhere in the middle. They see the value in trying to move away from doing so many experiments on monkeys, our closest relatives. But they're concerned that promising and necessary research will lose support in the process. Jamie Lowe, the researcher studying the effects of cannabis, says she believes animal models are an enduring part of science. At the same time, there are only so many clinical questions she has about cannabis use that haven't been answered yet. Jamie says she sees a point in the future where the monkey model isn't necessary for her work anymore. And Jonah Sasha, the researcher who's trying to find a cure for HIV, says while he believes animal research is still necessary, that might not always be true.
That may change in the future. It probably will change in my lifetime, and that's okay. That's good. That's human progress.
This has been a fascinating story to work on, one that had fewer clear-cut answers than I was expecting. I learned that monkeys do receive pain medication, companionship, and other comfort measures when they're involved in experiments that it's fair to say place them in very small cages and subject them to a lot of stress. I think I was expecting the critique of animal research to fall more clearly under the umbrella of people rejecting expert opinions and turning away from science. Instead, I found sincere differences of opinion among scientists about the value of primate research and how much of it could be skipped or replaced with something better. I'm really interested to see where animal research is in 5 to 10 years. I wonder if this is one of those moments in history where the pendulum is swinging away from conventional wisdom, and it's hard to know how far is the right amount to let it swing.
Amelia Templeton is a reporter for Oregon Public Broadcasting. You can find her coverage of the Oregon National Primate Research Center at opb.org. Thank you for listening to The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB. Julie Sabatier produced and engineered this episode, and our technical director is Stephen Cray. The OPB podcast team also includes Mia Estrada and Sage Van Wang. Amelia Templeton did the interviews you heard. The music in this episode is from Audio Network. And if you have a question for us, don't forget you can just reach out and ask. Email us at theevergreen@opb.org. I'm Jen Chavez. Catch you later.